The lecture hall buzzed with quiet conversations as students from dozens of different worlds took their seats. Hyunwoo Park looked around at the massive room that could hold 300 beings and felt small among all the alien faces. He sat in the middle section next to his friend Sojin Kim, who was reading notes on her tablet about today's topic. Dr. Veltarin entered the hall with the confident stride that only came from 800 years of teaching physics to young minds across the galaxy. The Altarian professor stood nearly 3 meters tall with silver skin that shimmered under the artificial lights. His forearms moved with practiced grace as he activated the holographic display system that would show complex equations and diagrams during his lecture. Hyunwoo had been looking forward to this class for weeks. Advanced Theoretical Physics was one of the most challenging courses offered at the Galactic University of Advanced Sciences, and Dr. Veltarin was considered one of the greatest minds in the field. The Human Exchange Program had only started 5 years ago, and Hyunwoo was proud to be among the first humans to study alongside beings from across known space. The professor's voice carried easily across the large room without any amplification. Today we will discuss the absolute limitations of faster-than-light travel and why certain barriers in physics cannot and will never be overcome by any species regardless of their technological advancement. Sojin shifted in her seat and whispered to Hyunwoo that she had heard this lecture before from other professors. They all seemed to agree that the current hyperdrive technology used by most advanced civilizations was as fast as anything could ever be. The laws of physics simply would not allow anything better. Dr. Veltarin began displaying complex mathematical formulas that filled the air above the students with glowing symbols and numbers. He explained how space and time were connected in ways that made it impossible to move faster than light without infinite energy. The equations showed that even bending space required massive amounts of power that only the largest starships could generate. "Some younger species," the professor said, while his eyes seemed to look directly at the 3 human students in the audience, "believe that their primitive understanding of mathematics and physics gives them insight that has escaped civilizations with millions of years of scientific development." A few students from various alien species turned to look at Hyunwoo and his 2 human classmates. He felt his face grow warm, but tried to focus on the lecture content rather than the professor's words. The mathematics being displayed was complex, but not impossible to follow if he concentrated. Dr. Veltarin continued his presentation by showing why quantum tunneling could not be applied to large objects like spacecraft. The energy requirements grew exponentially with size and mass until even moving something as small as a grain of sand faster than light would require more power than most stars produced in a year. Hyunwoo raised his hand slowly. He had been thinking about the quantum tunneling equations and wondered if there might be other approaches that did not require moving objects through space in the traditional sense. Maybe instead of moving through space, space itself could be changed or folded. "Professor, what about using quantum tunneling not to move objects but to manipulate space-time itself? If we could create localized compression fields that bring distant points closer together, wouldn't that achieve faster than light travel without actually exceeding the speed limit?" The lecture hall became very quiet. Dr. Veltarin's silver skin seemed to darken slightly as he looked down at the human student. His forearms crossed in front of his chest in what Hyunwoo had learned was a sign of displeasure among Altarians. "Young human," the professor said in a voice that carried across the silent room, "your species has been part of galactic civilization for less than 50 years. The question you ask shows a fundamental misunderstanding of physics that even first-year students from more advanced species would not make." Hyunwoo felt every eye in the room turn toward him. Some of the alien students made sounds that he recognized as laughter. Others simply stared with expressions he could not read on faces that were too different from human features. "Space-time manipulation on the scale you suggest would require an understanding of quantum mechanics that frankly is beyond human capability," Dr. Veltarin continued. "Perhaps you should focus your studies on engineering or trade skills that are more suited to your species' intellectual capacity." Sojin reached over and touched Hyunwoo's arm gently. She could see that her friend was hurt by the professor's words, but also that something else was happening behind his eyes. Instead of looking defeated, Hyunwoo appeared to be thinking very hard about something. The professor returned to his lecture as if nothing had happened. He spent the next hour explaining why various theoretical approaches to faster-than-light travel were impossible. Each time he presented a new concept, he would add comments about how certain species lacked the mental development to understand why these things could not work. Other students began to relax, and some even started making quiet jokes about the humans in their midst. A tall reptilian being from the Vegan system turned around and hissed something that the translation device in Hyunwoo's ear rendered as, "Mammals should stick to what they know best." When the lecture finally ended, Dr. Veltaran made one final announcement. Tomorrow we will continue this discussion with a focus on why human theories about physics are particularly flawed. I encourage all students to attend, as it will be an educational demonstration of how cultural bias can lead to incorrect scientific thinking. Students began filing out of the lecture hall in groups. Most of the aliens avoided the three humans entirely, while others made sure to walk close enough that the humans could hear their amused comments about primitive species and their silly ideas about physics. Sojin stood up and gathered her notes while watching Hyunwoo carefully. Her friend had not moved from his seat and was staring at the empty holographic display area where the professor's equations had been floating. His hands were moving slightly, as if he was working through calculations in his mind. "Hyunwoo, we should go," she said softly. "Don't let him get to you. Some professors think they know everything just because they're old." But Hyunwoo was not listening to her words. His mind was racing through the mathematics he had seen during the lecture. The professor had been wrong about one thing: the equations. For quantum tunneling did not have to apply to moving objects through space. They could apply to space itself. What if space could be compressed like a spring? What if distant points could be brought together without anything actually moving faster than light? The professor had dismissed the idea, but had not shown why it was impossible, only why it was difficult. "Sojin," he said finally, turning to look at his friend. "What do you know about resonance frequencies?" She looked confused by the sudden change of topic. "You mean like how a singer can break a glass by hitting the right note? What does that have to do with physics class?" Hyunwoo stood up and started walking toward the exit with Sojin following close behind. His mind was already working on the problem that Dr. Veltaran had said was impossible. Maybe the professor was right, that no faster way existed using current thinking. But humans had always been good at finding new ways to think about old problems. As they left the lecture hall, Hyunwoo was already planning what he would need to test his ideas. The professor wanted to demonstrate tomorrow why human theories were flawed. Maybe instead, Hyunwoo would demonstrate why sometimes the impossible was just another word for something nobody had figured out yet. Hyunwoo could not sleep. He lay in his narrow dormitory bed staring at the ceiling while his mind worked through the equations from Dr. Veltaran's lecture. The professor's words kept echoing in his thoughts, but instead of feeling defeated, Hyunwoo felt more determined than ever to prove that the impossible might just be difficult. At 2 in the morning, he gave up trying to rest and moved quietly to his small workshop area. The dormitory rooms for exchange students were not large, but each had a basic workspace with a computer terminal and holographic display system. Hyunwoo activated the displays and began sketching mathematical formulas in the air with his fingers. The quantum tunneling equations appeared in glowing blue symbols as he worked through them step by step. Dr. Veltaran had been correct that moving large objects through quantum tunnels required impossible amounts of energy. But what if the approach was completely different? What if instead of moving objects through space, space itself could be changed? Hyunwoo began writing new equations based on the idea of compressing space-time rather than moving through it. If two distant points could be brought closer together by folding the space between them, then traveling between those points would take less time without actually exceeding the speed of light. The mathematics were complex, but not impossible. His roommate Taemin Lee woke up around 3 in the morning and found Hyunwoo surrounded by floating mathematical displays. The computer science student rubbed his eyes and looked at the complex formulas filling the air of their small room. "What are you working on?" Taemin asked, while trying to understand the equations floating around his roommate. "This looks like theoretical physics, but more advanced than anything they teach in undergraduate classes." Hyunwoo explained what had happened in Dr. Veltaran's lecture and how the professor had dismissed his question about space-time manipulation. As he talked, Taemin began to see patterns in the mathematics that reminded him of programming algorithms he had studied. You know, Taemin said slowly, this reminds me of data compression. When we want to send large files quickly, we don't make the transmission faster. We make the files smaller by finding patterns and removing unnecessary information. The idea hit Hyun-woo like lightning. Data compression worked by finding repeating patterns and representing them with shorter codes. What if space itself had patterns that could be compressed? What if the quantum vacuum that filled all space had natural frequencies that could be manipulated? He began writing new equations based on wave mechanics and resonance theory. Every point in space vibrated at quantum frequencies that were usually too small to detect or influence. But if those frequencies could be amplified and synchronized, they might be able to create compression effects in space-time itself. Taemin watched his roommate work with growing excitement. This is like tuning a musical instrument. You're trying to find the natural frequency of space itself. That comment made Hyun-woo think about traditional Korean music and how certain combinations of notes could create emotional responses that seemed to resonate with something deeper than just hearing. The concept of Han in Korean culture described a deep emotional resonance that connected people to profound feelings and experiences. What if emotional resonance was not just a human cultural concept, but reflected something fundamental about how consciousness interacted with quantum fields? Human emotions created measurable brainwave patterns that could be detected by sensitive instruments. Those brainwaves were electromagnetic frequencies that traveled through space and could theoretically interact with quantum fields. Hyun-woo began incorporating brainwave frequencies into his calculations. The mathematics became even more complex, but also more elegant. He was describing a system where consciousness itself could influence the quantum structure of space-time through resonance effects. This is crazy, Taemin said as he followed the calculations. You're suggesting that human emotions could actually affect the fabric of space, but the mathematics supported the theory. Human brain waves operated at frequencies that overlapped, with certain quantum vacuum fluctuations. If those frequencies could be amplified and focused, they might be able to create localized compression effects in space-time. Taemin began writing computer programs to test the mathematical models. His algorithms ran thousands of simulations based on Hyun-woo's equations, and the results were consistent. Theoretical space-time compression was possible using resonance frequencies that humans could generate with the right equipment. By 5 in the morning, they had developed a complete theoretical framework for a space-time compression device. The mathematics showed that a small machine could create localized fields that would compress the distance between 2 points by significant amounts. A journey that normally took hours could be completed in minutes. The station's artificial intelligence system called ARIA monitored all student research projects and had been analyzing their work throughout the night. At dawn, she activated her communication system and spoke to them through the room's speakers. Students Park and Lee, ARIA said in her calm, synthetic voice, your theoretical calculations appear to be mathematically sound. However, the practical implementation of such a device would require materials and energy sources that do not currently exist. Hyun-woo looked up from his equations with tired but determined eyes. What kind of materials would we need? Arya displayed a list of specifications on their holographic screen. The device would require a quantum conductor capable of focusing, brainwave frequencies, a crystalline matrix that could maintain stable resonance patterns, and a power source that could amplify weak electromagnetic signals by several orders of magnitude. Most of these materials are available in the university's Advanced Fabrication Laboratory, Arya continued. However, student access to such equipment requires faculty supervision and approval for specific projects. Taemin leaned back in his chair and sighed. So we have the theory but no way to test it. Dr. Veltaren would never approve a project that contradicts everything he just taught in class. But Hyun-woo was not ready to give up. He had spent the entire night working through mathematics that proved space-time compression was theoretically possible. Somewhere on this space station there had to be materials and equipment that could turn theory into reality. Arya, he said, are there any faculty members who might be interested in unconventional research projects? Someone who wouldn't immediately dismiss human theories about physics? The artificial intelligence was quiet for several seconds while she searched through faculty records and research interests. Supervisor Kethamori in the fabrication laboratory has published papers on alternative approaches to faster-than-light travel. His research focuses on non-traditional methods that other species might overlook. Hyun-woo felt hope returning to his tired mind. If one faculty member was willing to consider new approaches, maybe there was a chance to test his theory. The mathematics were solid, and the computer simulations supported the concept. All he needed was access to the right materials and equipment. He began preparing a presentation that would explain his space-time compression theory in simple terms. The mathematics were complex, but the basic concept was straightforward. Instead of moving faster than light, space itself could be compressed to make journeys shorter. Taemin helped him create visual demonstrations that would make the theory easier to understand. They used analogies from data compression and musical resonance to explain how quantum frequencies could affect space-time. By morning, they had a complete proposal ready to present to anyone willing to listen. As other students began waking up and starting their daily routines, Hyun-woo and Taemin prepared to find Supervisor Keth Mori and request access to the fabrication laboratory. Dr. Velteron had said that no faster way existed, but Hyun-woo was determined to prove that human ingenuity could find solutions that others had never considered. The professor wanted to demonstrate why human theories were flawed, but instead, he had inspired a human student to develop a theory that might revolutionize faster-than-light travel. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs came from people who were too stubborn to accept that something was impossible. Supervisor Keth Mori looked nothing like Hyun-woo had expected. The Centaurian stood only slightly taller than a human with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the fabrication laboratory around them. When Hyun-woo and Taemin approached him with their proposal, he listened carefully without the dismissive attitude they had encountered from other faculty members. "Your mathematics are interesting," Keth Mori said after reviewing their holographic displays for nearly an hour. "Most species focus on brute force approaches to faster-than-light travel. Your resonance theory suggests a more elegant solution." The supervisor had worked with human students before during the Titan mining crisis, when their unconventional problem-solving had saved an entire colony. He had learned to respect human ingenuity even when their methods seemed impossible according to traditional scientific thinking. "I cannot officially approve this project," Keth Mori continued, "but the fabrication laboratory is accessible to students after hours for independent research. If certain materials were to become available through normal requisition procedures, and if someone were to accidentally leave the advanced equipment unlocked, I would not be responsible for what students might accomplish." Hyun-woo felt excitement building in his chest. They would have access to the tools and materials needed to test their theory, but he also realized that building a working prototype would require more expertise than just his engineering background and Taemin's computer skills. Word spread quickly through the small human student community on the station. By evening, Ji-hae Choi had joined their project after hearing about the space-time compression theory. The materials science student brought knowledge about advanced composites and crystalline structures that would be essential for building their device. The bio-neural gel that humans developed for brain-computer interfaces could work as a quantum conductor, Ji-hae explained as she reviewed their specifications. "We use it in medical devices to translate brainwave patterns into digital signals. Your theory suggests it might also be able to focus those same brainwaves into quantum fields." She had been working on her own research into how traditional Korean ceramic techniques could be applied to advanced materials. The ancient methods for creating perfectly balanced pottery involved understanding natural resonance frequencies in clay and minerals. Those same principles might work for creating crystalline matrices that could maintain stable quantum resonance patterns. The three students met Supervisor Keth Mori in the fabrication laboratory after midnight, when most of the station was quiet. The Centaurian showed them how to operate the advanced manufacturing equipment and left them with access codes that would allow them to work through the night. "Remember," he said before leaving, "I was never here, and I know nothing about what you are building. If anyone asks, you are working on a standard engineering project for your coursework." The fabrication laboratory contained equipment that could manipulate matter at the molecular level. Machines that normally required years of training to operate safely were made available to them with basic safety instructions and emergency shutdown procedures. Hyun-woo felt the weight of responsibility as he realized they were about to attempt something that could revolutionize faster-than-light travel or potentially destroy half the space station. HFY began creating the crystalline matrix using techniques that combined advanced alien technology with principles from traditional Korean pottery. She worked with materials that could maintain quantum coherence at room temperature and shaped them using resonance frequencies that had been used to create beautiful ceramics for thousands of years. The ancient masters understood that every material has a natural frequency, she explained, while the fabrication machines hummed around them. They learned to work with those frequencies instead of against them. Clay wants to become pottery if you listen to what it needs. Taemin programmed the quantum resonance patterns based on traditional Korean musical scales. He had discovered that the mathematical relationships between musical notes were similar to the frequency ratios needed for space-time compression. The same harmonic progressions that created beautiful music might also create stable compression fields. Hyunwoo integrated all the components into a device that looked surprisingly simple from the outside. The crystalline matrix was contained in a metallic cube about the size of a lunchbox. Bio-neural gel circuits covered the surface in patterns that pulsed with soft blue light when activated. Internal components included resonance generators, field stabilizers, and quantum amplifiers that could boost weak brainwave signals into powerful space-time manipulation fields. The first test was scheduled for 3 in the morning when the laboratory would be completely empty except for them. Hyunwoo activated the device with shaking hands, while Ji-hye and Taemin monitored the safety systems from a control station several meters away. Nothing seemed to happen for the first few seconds. The device hummed quietly, and the bio-neural gel circuits pulsed with their gentle blue glow, but there were no obvious effects. Then Hyunwoo noticed that the distance between 2 workbenches appeared to be getting shorter. "It's working," he whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might disrupt the delicate quantum processes occurring around them. The space-time compression field expanded slowly until it covered an area about 10 meters across. Within that field, distances were compressed by a factor of 10. A walk that normally took 20 steps could be completed in 2. Objects appeared closer together while still maintaining their actual positions relative to each other. Ji-hye walked from one side of the field to the other in what felt like normal time, but covered the compressed distance much faster than should have been possible. "This is incredible. I can feel the effect, but it doesn't seem strange or disorienting. It's like space itself has become smaller." The compression effect lasted for exactly 3 minutes before the device automatically shut down to prevent overheating. Hyunwoo checked the power consumption readings and discovered that maintaining the field required surprisingly little energy. Most of the work was being done by quantum resonance effects that amplified the input signal naturally. Taemin ran diagnostics on all the monitoring equipment to make sure their readings were accurate. "The computers confirm what we observed. We created a stable space-time compression field that reduced distances by 90% for 3 minutes. The mathematics were correct." They spent the next several hours refining the device and testing different compression ratios. By dawn, they had achieved compression factors as high as 50-1, meaning that a 50-meter distance could be crossed in the same time it normally took to travel 1 meter. The effects were stable, controllable, and used relatively small amounts of power. Ji-hye suggested improvements to the crystalline matrix that could make the device smaller and more efficient. Taemin developed better control algorithms that allowed precise manipulation of the compression field size and intensity. Hyunwoo worked on safety systems that would prevent the device from creating dangerous gravitational effects or space-time instabilities. As morning approached and other students began arriving at the laboratory, they carefully packed their device into a standard equipment case that would not attract attention. Supervisor Keth Mori appeared exactly on schedule to begin the day's official laboratory activities. "I trust your independent research went well," he said with a slight smile while checking that all equipment had been properly secured. "I hope you learned something useful about advanced fabrication techniques." Hyunwoo carried the case containing their space-time compression device back to his dormitory room while trying to look like any other student finishing a late-night study session. Inside the innocent-looking box was technology that could change everything about how beings traveled through space. Dr. Veltaran's lecture was scheduled for that afternoon. The professor planned to demonstrate why human theories about physics were particularly flawed and why certain barriers could never be overcome by any species. But Hyun-woo now had proof that the impossible was just another engineering problem waiting for the right solution. The device in his hands represented more than just a successful experiment. It was evidence that human determination and unconventional thinking could achieve results that even the most advanced alien civilizations had never imagined. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs came from people who were too stubborn to accept expert opinions about what could not be done. The lecture hall was more crowded than Hyun-woo had ever seen it. Word had spread throughout the university that Dr. Velteran planned to deliver a special presentation about human limitations in theoretical physics. Students from dozens of species filled every available seat while others stood along the walls to observe what many expected to be an entertaining academic humiliation. University officials occupied the front row, including Dean Vorthak, whose multiple eyes could focus on different parts of the room simultaneously. Several diplomatic representatives sat nearby, including Ambassador Dalrun from the Altarian Embassy, who had come specifically to witness this demonstration of human intellectual inferiority. Captain Elena Rodriguez had arrived that morning aboard a human trade vessel and attended the lecture at the invitation of the university's cultural exchange program. The experienced starship captain looked uncomfortable among all the academic dignitaries, but her presence added weight to what was supposed to be a routine educational presentation. Dr. Velteran entered the lecture hall with even more confidence than usual. His silver skin seemed to glow under the bright lights as he activated the holographic display systems and prepared to deliver what he considered one of his most important lectures. The professor had spent considerable time preparing examples of human scientific errors and mathematical mistakes that would demonstrate their species' fundamental limitations. Esteemed colleagues and students, he began with his voice carrying easily across the packed auditorium, today we will examine why certain species, despite their enthusiasm, lack the intellectual capacity to understand advanced physics and why their attempts at theoretical innovation inevitably lead to embarrassing failures. Hyun-woo sat in the same middle section where he had been humiliated the day before. The equipment case containing their space-time compression device rested at his feet, looking like any other student project. Sojin and Taemin flanked him while Ji-hai sat one row behind, ready to provide technical support if needed. Dr. Velteran began displaying examples of what he called primitive human mathematics that showed fundamental misunderstandings about quantum mechanics and space-time physics. Each example was accompanied by condescending explanations about why humans consistently made these predictable errors. The human brain, the professor continued, evolved for simple tasks like hunting and gathering. It lacks the neural complexity necessary to comprehend multidimensional mathematics or quantum field interactions. Their attempts at advanced physics are like children playing with tools they cannot understand. Laughter rippled through parts of the audience as alien students enjoyed the intellectual superiority being demonstrated by their esteemed professor. Some made comments about human limitations that the translation systems rendered into amused observations about primitive species and their amusing delusions. Yesterday, Dr. Velteran said while looking directly at Hyun-woo, a human student suggested that space-time manipulation might be possible using quantum resonance effects. This demonstrates the exact type of flawed thinking that makes humans unsuitable for advanced scientific research. The professor displayed complex equations that showed why space-time compression required impossible amounts of energy and violated fundamental laws of physics. His presentation was mathematically sophisticated and thoroughly convincing to anyone who accepted traditional assumptions about quantum mechanics and energy requirements. No device smaller than a moon could generate sufficient power to create meaningful space-time compression effects, Dr. Velteran concluded. Any human who believes otherwise is simply demonstrating their species' inability to understand basic physics. Captain Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in her seat as she listened to the systematic dismissal of human scientific capability. She had seen human engineers solve problems that alien experts had declared impossible, but this academic environment felt different from the practical challenges of deep space exploration. Hyun-woo raised his hands slowly as he had done the day before. The gesture caused immediate quiet throughout the lecture hall as everyone remembered his previous humiliation and expected another entertaining demonstration of human ignorance. "Professor," he said with a steady voice that carried clearly through the silent auditorium, Would you be interested in seeing a practical demonstration of human engineering approaches to theoretical problems? Dr. Veltaran's mandibles clicked with what Hyunwoo now recognized as anticipatory pleasure. The professor clearly expected this to be an opportunity for even greater humiliation than the previous day had provided. Certainly, Dr. Veltaran replied, with obvious confidence. Please show us this human engineering project so that everyone can observe the difference between wishful thinking and actual science. Hyunwoo stood and walked to the center of the lecture hall, carrying the equipment case that contained their space-time compression device. The audience watched with varying degrees of amusement and curiosity as he opened the case and carefully removed what appeared to be a simple metallic cube covered in softly glowing circuits. This device creates localized space-time compression, fields using quantum resonance effects, he announced while activating the control systems. It demonstrates that human approaches to physics can achieve results that traditional methods consider impossible. Several audience members laughed at what they assumed was an elaborate joke or perhaps a desperate attempt to save face after yesterday's academic humiliation. Dr. Veltaran watched with confident anticipation as he prepared to explain exactly why whatever the human was attempting could not possibly work. Hyunwoo placed the device on the floor in the center of the lecture hall and stepped back to a safe distance. The bio-neural gel circuits began pulsing with increasing intensity as the quantum resonance generators activated and began focusing energy into the surrounding space-time. For several seconds, nothing visible happened, and some audience members began making amused comments about human technology that did not actually function. Then the air in the center of the lecture hall began to shimmer slightly as space-time compression effects started to manifest. The compression field expanded outward from the device until it covered an area roughly 20 meters in diameter. Within that field, the normal 50-meter length of the lecture hall appeared to compress to approximately 10 meters. Students on opposite sides of the room could suddenly see each other much more clearly as the distance between them effectively decreased. A vegan student near the back wall stood up and walked toward the front of the auditorium. What should have been a long walk across the entire lecture hall took only a few steps as she moved through the compressed space. She reached the front row in seconds instead of the minute it would normally require. The lecture hall erupted in chaos as hundreds of beings tried to understand what they were witnessing. Students jumped to their feet and began testing the compression effects for themselves. Those outside the field watched in amazement as their classmates moved impossible distances in impossibly short times. Dean Vorthak's multiple eyes focused intently on the device while his administrative mind immediately began calculating the implications for university research programs and galactic patent applications. Ambassador Dalrune sat in stunned silence as his entire understanding of Altarian scientific superiority crumbled before his eyes. Dr. Veltaran's confident expression transformed into confusion and then growing panic as he realized that his fundamental assumptions about physics limitations had been completely wrong. His mandibles clicked rapidly in a pattern that indicated extreme agitation and intellectual distress. "This is impossible," he declared while standing and moving toward the compression field. "The energy requirements alone make this device a theoretical impossibility. There must be some kind of deception or hidden power source." But Captain Rodriguez had extensive experience with various types of spacecraft technology, and she could see that the device was operating exactly as Hyunwoo claimed. The compression effects were real, stable, and apparently sustainable using only the power contained within the small metallic cube. "Professor," she called out over the excited conversations filling the auditorium, "I've been in space for 20 years, and I can tell you that what this young man has built could revolutionize every aspect of galactic transportation and commerce." The compression field held steady for exactly 1 minute before Hyunwoo deactivated the device to prevent overheating. The lecture hall immediately returned to its normal dimensions, but the implications of what everyone had witnessed would reshape their understanding of physics and human capability for years to come. Dr. Veltaran stood in the center of the now normal-sized auditorium, looking completely defeated as students and officials surrounded Hyunwoo with questions about his revolutionary technology. The professor who had spent centuries teaching others about absolute limitations had just learned that sometimes the impossible was simply something that nobody had figured out how to do yet. Dean Vorthak's office had never been so crowded. University officials, diplomatic representatives, patent office inspectors, and trade council members filled every available chair while others stood along the walls. At the center of attention sat Hyunwoo with his space-time compression device on the dean's desk, surrounded by scanning equipment and monitoring devices. Dr. Veltaran paced nervously near the window while his 800 years of academic confidence slowly crumbled. He had spent the last 3 hours claiming that the device must be some kind of elaborate hoax, but every test confirmed that the compression effects were genuine and revolutionary. The mathematics are clearly flawed, he insisted for the dozenth time. No device this small could possibly generate the quantum resonance effects necessary for space-time manipulation. There must be a hidden power source or some kind of projection technology creating an illusion. But the scanning equipment told a different story. Energy readings showed that the device consumed less power than a standard lighting system while creating measurable alterations in local space-time curvature. The compression effects could be verified by multiple independent measurement systems that confirmed distances were actually being reduced rather than simulated. Dr. Myung-Soo Han arrived on an emergency transport from Earth after news of the breakthrough reached human space. The respected theoretical physicist had spent decades working on faster-than-light travel theories and immediately recognized the significance of what Hyunwoo had accomplished. The fundamental insight is brilliant. In its simplicity, Dr. Han explained to the assembled officials. Instead of trying to move objects faster than light, this technology compresses the space between objects so they can reach each other more quickly without violating physical laws. He reviewed Hyunwoo's mathematical proofs while nodding with growing admiration. The integration of human emotional resonance concepts with quantum field theory represents a completely new approach to physics. We focused on technical solutions, while this young man recognized that consciousness itself might be a fundamental force in quantum mechanics. Captain Rodriguez found herself in the unexpected position of negotiating preliminary trade agreements for technology that did not officially exist yet. Representatives from major shipping companies were already calculating how compression drive systems could revolutionize galactic commerce and transportation. A cargo run that currently takes 6 months could be completed in 6 days, she explained, to trade council members who were frantically trying to understand the economic implications. Every established shipping route and delivery schedule in known space will become obsolete overnight. Ambassador Dalrune sat quietly in one corner, looking like his entire worldview had been shattered. The Altarian diplomatic service had built their reputation on claims of scientific and intellectual superiority that had just been thoroughly demolished by a human undergraduate student with access to basic university equipment. Ji Hai worked with patent office officials to document the materials science innovations that made the device possible. Her integration of traditional Korean ceramic techniques with advanced crystalline matrices represented breakthrough discoveries in quantum conductor technology that would have applications far beyond space-time compression. The ancient masters understood principles about resonance and material harmony that were only beginning to rediscover, she explained while demonstrating how properly shaped crystals could maintain quantum coherence at room temperature. Science and art are not separate disciplines, but different approaches to understanding the same natural laws. Taemin found himself explaining his control algorithms to computer scientists from multiple species who could barely believe that musical mathematical relationships could be applied to quantum field manipulation. His programs had translated traditional Korean musical scales into quantum resonance patterns that created stable compression effects. Every culture has music, he told the fascinated researchers. If musical mathematics can influence space-time, then every species in the galaxy has access to the same fundamental principles we used. Humans just happen to recognize the connection first. Dean Vorthak struggled to maintain order as more officials arrived throughout the day demanding demonstrations and explanations. The university had become the center of the most significant scientific breakthrough in galactic history, and nobody was quite sure how to handle the implications. We need to establish research protocols and safety guidelines, he announced to the crowded room. This technology could revolutionize civilization, but it must be developed responsibly with proper oversight and international cooperation. But Hyunwoo had other ideas about how his invention should be shared with the galaxy. He had built the device using basic materials and equipment that were available at most advanced universities. The mathematical principles were complex, but not impossible to understand for anyone willing to study them seriously. "I want to publish everything," he told the assembled officials. "The mathematics, the engineering specifications, the materials science innovations, and the control algorithms should be freely available to any species that wants to study them. Scientific knowledge should not be restricted or controlled by governments and corporations." His announcement caused immediate chaos, as patent officials realized they might not be able to establish exclusive licensing agreements, and trade representatives understood that their competitive advantages might disappear if the technology became widely available. Dr. Veltaran finally stopped pacing and approached Hyunwoo with what appeared to be genuine humility. The proud professor who had spent centuries dismissing other species looked uncomfortable as he prepared to acknowledge his fundamental errors. "Young human," he said quietly, "I owe you and your species a profound apology. My arrogance and prejudice prevented me from recognizing the validity of your theoretical approach. I spent so much time believing in absolute limitations that I forgot science is about discovering new possibilities." He paused and looked around the room at all the officials and researchers who were frantically trying to understand the implications of human ingenuity. "Perhaps it is time for me to become a student again and learn from those I foolishly considered intellectually inferior." 6 months later, Hyunwoo stood in the same lecture hall where he had been humiliated by Dr. Veltaran's dismissive comments. But now he was the professor delivering a course called Applied Human Problem Solving in Advanced Physics. The auditorium was packed with students from every known species who wanted to learn about the unconventional thinking that had revolutionized faster-than-light travel. "The most dangerous words in the universe," he told his diverse audience of eager young minds, "are not 'I don't know,' because admitting ignorance is the first step toward learning something new. The most dangerous words are 'it cannot be done,' because they stop us from even trying to find solutions." Human-designed compression drives were already being installed on spacecraft throughout the galaxy as the technology spread faster than anyone had predicted. Trade routes that had taken months now required only days, and previously impossible journeys to distant stars became routine commercial flights. Sojin had established a research institute dedicated to studying how different species' cultural approaches to music and art could be applied to quantum physics. Her work demonstrated that creativity and scientific discovery were connected in ways that traditional education had never recognized. Dr. Veltaran published his first research paper in decades titled The Necessity of Emotional Intuition in Quantum Mechanics, a reconsideration of Altarian academic methodology. He had requested a transfer to study human cognitive approaches to theoretical physics and become one of the most vocal advocates for interdisciplinary cooperation between species. The phrase, "think like a human," had become synonymous with innovative problem-solving throughout galactic civilization. Universities across known space began incorporating human educational methods into their curriculums, while research institutions actively recruited human scientists and engineers. But perhaps the most important change was in how different species viewed each other. The assumption that age and technological advancement automatically conveyed intellectual superiority had been thoroughly disproven by a young human who refused to accept expert opinions about what was impossible. As Hyunwoo concluded his lecture and watched students from dozens of worlds discussing new approaches to old problems, he reflected on how much had changed since that day when Dr. Veltaran had dismissed human capabilities. Sometimes the greatest discoveries came not from those who knew the most, but from those who were willing to question everything and imagine that impossible might just be another word for something nobody had figured out how to do yet.